Great. Thanks so much, Tila, and welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to have so many people with us this afternoon. We're so excited to have arrived at this place that we've anticipated really for the last 2.5 years since the adoption of our 2020 strategic plan. Over the course of that time, we've worked with partners across Colorado to advance our shared values in the outdoors. Together, we've invested $112 million across 44 counties, and through just over 250 projects, we've collaborated to address the unique challenges and opportunities our landscapes and communities are facing today. So we are super excited to talk with you all about dreaming bigger and beyond the boundaries of our ongoing base programs. And to do that, I'll hand it over to Chris Farrell, our Director of Programs, and our regional program team to tell you more about GOCO Centennial program.
Thanks, Jackie. Everybody hear me okay? Perfect. I am going to start sharing my screen and then put you through the unfortunate business of watching a PowerPoint presentation, but hopefully it's helpful to walk along with us as we go through that. Thank you, Jackie. I share in Jackie's excitement. It's hard to match her level of excitement, but it's there if I don't present it. To be at where we're at right now with you all, ready to really implement on one of our signature programs. Let me begin sharing here. And that is the Centennial program. So really today's discussion is designed to give you a sense for, how we arrived at what we're calling the Centennial program, some of the nuts and bolts of how it'll function and operate on the grant making side, give you a sense for the types of project outcomes we're expecting to materialize from this program. And by and large, really just get a sense from you and a chance for you to connect with us and start to build those relationships. This will really be driven, this process, through consultation and discussions with regional officers. So we're going to start there. We're going to have regional officers, just so you all can put faces to names, introduce themselves, come on camera, and then we'll get into the heart of the discussion. So before I have them introduce themselves, hopefully you're seeing now our regional map. As you all know, probably at this time in 2020, we made an intentional decision to regionalize. It was the first time in our nearly 30-year history at that time that we had been anything but Denver-based. And we made an intentional adjustment to our operations structure to have regional representation, to be able to engage in deeper level conversations with you all, to build those relationships, start to feel embedded in communities, and have a local voice to communicate, the desires and outcomes that you all wish to see in your communities. So we're one step closer to that process by now having 7 regional officers located throughout the state. So we'll go ahead and start with Matt Brady. Matt, if you want to start us off here.
Yeah, perfect. Again, my name is Matt Brady, Regional Program Officer for the Denver metro area, and that includes a 3-county radius of Denver, Adams, and Arapahoe counties. I think we can push it on to Alex now. Is that?
Thanks, Matt. I'm Alex Castino, the Northern Front Range Program Officer. So you'll see on the map the counties there. I think we're going to Chris Obie next.
Hi, everyone. I am Chris Obie, and I am the Program Officer for the Southern Front Range.
And
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Estrella Woods. I'm the Southwest Program Officer, working with communities across 13 counties in the Southwest. And I will pass it over to Katie. Thank you. Thanks, Estrella.
I'm Katie Smith. I'm a program officer for the West. I get the privilege of serving Ouray County up to Moffat County, and I'm based in Delta.
Dan, you're muted.
Man, I'll tell you what, you'd think after 2 years of COVID, I'd figure that out by now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dan Omasta. I'm the North Central Region Program Officer, covering a lot of our mountain counties from Gunnison and Chaffee up north to the Wyoming border, based in Buena Vista. And I'll pass it over to Sammy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sammy George, and I am the Eastern Colorado Regional Officer covering 15 counties from Sedgwick down to Baca, east of I-25, and I am based in Rocky Ford.
Great. Thank you, Sammy. Sammy rounds out the show here. Just want to give you a little meet and greet. I wish we had time to go through all the folks on the phone, but I think we've got 200 some registrants, and I'm not sure how many showed up for this, so we're not going to take that time here today. But I saw a number of folks on the phone or on the list that I know. For those of you I don't know, I hope to meet you someday soon. And sorry, I just saw a chat pop up. Is not everybody seeing the presentation? Can you see the regional officers map? Okay, that might be a one-off. So I'll just continue, expecting you all can see it. Again, if we're having technical difficulties.
Not here.
Uh-oh. How about now? I'm going to stop presenting and try and share again.
It seems that folks have to sync with the presenter. So if they click on the PowerPoint themselves, they should see an option to sync with presenter.
This is the danger in adopting new technology. If you can't see it, this will be shared after this webinar. It's being recorded. We'll host it on our website. And again, you know, part of the intent behind having this conversation today is to continue the conversation. So we're happy to walk through, or our regional officers will be happy to walk through this with you one-on-one, or as a group if you're desiring that. So we'll just go ahead and move on and talk about the Centennial program. This was born out of a lot of discussions, a lot of reminiscing about, you know, where GOCO had been in our 30-year history and how we can create a program to incentivize, accelerate multi-benefit outcomes in communities. And we intentionally worked with communities across the state in developing this program through our 2020 strategic planning process. And it's really reflected, hopefully, in what you'll see today, those conversations that we had. In addition to reorganizing as a regional staffing model, we also, in 2020, moved forward with a values-based approach to programming. And our grant programs are really organized around these 5, what we're calling program values. Again, these were developed through our 2020 planning process in partnership with many of you on the phone here today and the communities across Colorado as the 5 kind of pillar values that we want to highlight over the next period of years as outcomes of all of our grant programs. I'm not going to walk through them one by one here. They're self-explanatory for the most part, but suffice it to say, there's an intent that through Centennial program projects, the scope and scale and magnitude of them will help us attain multiple program values through those projects. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm gonna put up a big, you know, digital asterisk or caveat there that if you feel like your project really only speaks to one of these in earnest, we want to have your conversation still. The biggest intent behind Centennial program is to vision with you all. We know that this is heart work for you all, and that's heart, you know, like the organ right here. That these projects that you envision for your communities that are born out of community conversations, we want to help you achieve those visions just as much as you do. And so let us have those conversations. Let us dream with you as to what those aspirational visions might be. And when we walk through, some of the genesis of the Centennial program was really, again, born out of our 30 years of experience and taking a look back at some of the transformative projects we've had a hand in helping cross the finish line for communities. And these are just a handful of examples that we think about and want to be able to replicate in other communities across the state. So the top left is an obvious one on our natural resource or resource conservation value. That's Greenland Ranch, that respite of open space that you see when you travel on I-25 between what used to be Castle Rock and Monument Hill, and now it's probably closer to Larkspur and Monument Hill, but a significant open space expanse that was a catalyst for additional conservation activity in that area and has public access open space opportunities. It's a scenic vista. It's the type of quintessential land acquisition we might expect to see through Centennial visioning. Again, thinking of that larger scale transformative impact we've been able to have across the state. Similarly on the West Slope, sorry for any West Slopers on the call here today, especially if you're from the Grand Valley. This is probably not the most picturesque view of the Colorado Riverfront Trail, but it is a aspirational vision that, as a community, we've been able to help you achieve to develop in pieces a connected trail from, Palisade now all the way out to the Utah border and beyond to connect communities, connect amenities, connect people to the Colorado River in ways that didn't exist before. Again, one of these, aspirational visions that we are hoping to help folks achieve in their own communities. Up in the mountain communities, we think about places like Steamboat Springs and the Yampa River Valley. And this picture here is, emphasizing Steamboat Springs itself, but that Yampa River corridor has been a showcase of work among a number of partnerships throughout the valley. That includes working lands conservation. It includes development of the Yampa River Core Trail, recreational opportunities through that, the Emerald Mountain area, which is protection and recreational opportunities, a lot of multi-value outcomes that have come together and aggregate over time. Can we help achieve those aggregate visions more quickly through an investment through like the Centennial program might allow? And then finally on the bottom right there, that's a picture of Johnson Habitat Park along the South Platte River here in Denver. That was a many-year multi-partnership vision of the South Platte River Greenway. Many different participants in that visioning step, getting to where they are today with multiple parkside amenities and park spaces along the river to connect people to the South Platte River, which was once thought of as just this desolate, toxic wasteland, and reconnecting people to what is actually, a thriving ecology and the opportunities there are there for parkside recreation, connecting people back to that river and riverine landscape, and an associated trail that travels the length of the South Platte River through Denver metro area. So these are the types of projects. We often feel like we don't like to spotlight these only because we feel like it might limit your vision. So we offer them as just things to think about as you envision for your community, what you might want to see, what types of projects GOCO might be thinking about that would elevate to the scale of a Centennial program investment. And again, there are a number of things that we're looking for as part and parcel to a Centennial project. I go back to that list of our 5 program values. There is an expectation that we'll be able to, again, given the scale and magnitude of these projects, really achieve multiple program value outcomes when those projects get implemented. Across our programs and as an organization, we are taking a hard look at equity and seeing how we show up as grant makers and how our projects really speak to equity out on the ground when implemented. So there's an expectation that there are equity outcomes associated with Centennial program grants. Really engaging with underrepresented communities, communities that haven't been at the table in the planning process, really authentically engaging and understanding what the needs of those communities are relative to the outdoor recreation space, relative to the natural resources space that a Centennial program project might provide. So as part of the, the next step here, the community-driven process, that certainly should involve those underrepresented communities, but a broad constituency of community support as well. There is an expectation that there really is strong engagement, that this is not somebody sitting in a planning office and having a dream, which could very well be great, right? But we want to ensure that that dream is shared among community members across the region and across your program area. So we expect Centennial program projects to have an elevated level of community participation in the planning process. In funding, just given the scale and magnitude, we recognize that even at, the money, the funding we have available as GOCO, it just is not going to go far enough. And so for the scale of a transformative project, it's going to require participation from other funders, from other programs to get a project done. So there is an expectation of strong participation and support in the form of financing for these proposals. And it's often an indication of, if nothing else, that this is a regional priority, that is a priority for those folks willing to put funding on the table or sweat equity, if that's the contribution, in order to show that this really is a cross-jurisdictional project. And that gets to the final bullet, that this really should be of regional importance, a showcase for the region. Again, that's that heart work. What's the community need? What is the community desire that is going to be the defining characteristic of these Centennial projects? Is it going to be the next Greenland Ranch? Is that the desire of the community? Is it going to be the next Yampa Valley corridor with river connections, with trail connections, with open space? What does that look like for your communities and the constituents you're working with? And so to that end, knowing that these are larger scale projects that, in our development of this program, we had a lot of conversations with those communities that we've previously funded and just asked the question, what was the recipe for success? What did it take to get to those ultimate outcomes? And by and large, what we heard is we need to give enough time and resources dedicated to those conversations, those community conversations, to bringing partners together and having conversations about what are the regional priorities we want to advance in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And those might rise up as the next Centennial program investments. So in light of that, we intentionally structured our Centennial program sort of in 2 phases. So starting in 2024 and 2025, the larger dollar amounts will be available for implementation of projects. The beginning of our spending plan, 2021, 2022, 2023, we've had money available for what we're calling the Centennial visioning step. And some of you on the phone might be participants in some of those visionings. And it's as the title describes, it's an intentional opportunity to bring partners together to understand community needs and desires related to outdoor recreation and natural resource outcomes. So it's broad-based. It's really trying to get a sense for defining characteristics of a project we want to advance, whether it's a regional trail, a new park development, a large open space with public access, whatever the community vision is, having time and space available to develop those visions. And I'll caveat this by saying there's not an expectation that every Centennial Visioning grant we make will materialize into an implementation grant. And the flip side is also true. We don't expect that every community is going to need to go through this visioning step. You could be far enough along to where, you know, you're ready to implement. And so we expect to fund projects through the Centennial program that come from both channels, either having a visioning step or not. And then also that those visioning steps, while it might not materialize into a Centennial level investment, perhaps there are smaller scale outcomes that we might be able to invest in through our base programs. When we talk about the Centennial program, it's a large corpus of our funding, to the tune of $100 million. And that was intentional to give it the weight and magnitude that it deserves. This is a signature program of GOCO's. For those of you who've been around GOCO for a long time, it's akin to our legacy programs, akin to our River Corridors initiative, and most recently our Protect, Connect, and Inspire initiatives. And so, you know, we structured it at $100 million, but it's bifurcated into kind of two compartments. On our competitive side, we have our open space funding and our local government funding at $50 million. And then separately, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has identified roughly $50 million in a program they're calling the Centennial Fund to advance agency priorities. And so that's a whole completely separate pool of funding that we have, that Colorado Parks and Wildlife has autonomy over to decide what investments they would like to make. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be and aren't encouraging partners to talk to Colorado Parks and Wildlife in a number of ways. So first and foremost, you know, we want to know the benefits and or impacts of a potential project on wildlife outcomes or parks and trails related outcomes. So involving CPW early in the process is essential for us. And then secondarily, if we go back and look at a project like Fisher's Peak, that began as a land acquisition, and it was through conversations with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and other partners that it developed into what it is today, and it's the next state park. Now, it doesn't mean we expect every land acquisition that comes through Centennial to have that ultimate outcome, but it's worth the conversation. If there's a nexus to a state park, if there's a nexus to a state wildlife area, it's worth the conversation to see if your project has risen in the chain of priority for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and maybe there's an investment opportunity there. But by and large, you know, what we're talking about today are Centennial investments on the CPW side. Centennial investments on the competitive grant side, our open space funding and our local government funding. And within that, we're taking different approaches to those funding opportunities, knowing that land acquisitions are somewhat opportunistic, can come about with relative urgency, with the need for funders and partners to be flexible. What we've operationalized is for land acquisition projects to come to us now, even through our existing land acquisition base program. So projects that are of Centennial scale, and we've talked about what that means, and we hope you have further conversations with your regional program officer to identify those land acquisitions that are of Centennial scale. You can come through our base program land acquisitions for those proposals. And so that gives you 3 times a year an opportunity to propose a land acquisition to us, and we'll vet it and put it through our standard review process, and make a recommendation to our programs committee and ultimately our board as to whether or not we want to make an award. I'll walk through what the operation chain of operations look like for other investments that are more of on the order of a park development project, because it is a little bit different. Again, the difference being we wanted to be more responsive to the urgency of that land acquisitions often present. So let me walk through that now real quick. Sorry, my screen is not being cooperative. Okay, so we've laid out a Centennial timeline, and this timeline is associated with park development projects. You could have a land acquisition that has park development elements. Again, we'll work with you to target the right and appropriate channel for you. But for park development projects that have a heavy infrastructure component, whether it's trail work or skate parks, things that require those types of infrastructure investments, we're offering Centennial program on an annual basis beginning next year. So starting in January of 23, we will have the concept paper available for folks to take a look at. We're going to have just like all of our new base programs, we're operating this on a concept to application process. Really, that just gives us time to work with you as communities to identify projects, target them to the most appropriate round, understand what the impacts are, understand what the project outcomes look like, and run you through this process. So beginning in January is where we hope that you start communicating with regional program officers about your outcomes. And we'll get to, in a couple of slides, an intervening step we want to discuss with you. But that's when we expect conversations to start happening in earnest. And then in May, we'll officially open a concepting phase where you can, on a rolling basis, submit concept papers. We do have a final concept deadline of August 3rd, and that's because we needed to cut it off at some point. But really the intent, especially with this program, especially with how competitive we expect this to be, we really want to see concept papers early and iteratively. So working with your regional program officer to get your thoughts on paper about what project outcomes might look like, go through iterations of drafts with program officers to really refine it to a place where we feel like it will be most competitive. And by August 3rd, having that final concept paper due. What we want to hedge against is folks coming in on August 3rd without having any previous conversation with a regional program officer or even any previous draft. We can't, outright disregard the proposals that do come in. We're all human. A lot of us on staff have been in your shoes as applicants, and it happens, right? We understand that. But we feel like we can best position you to be competitive if we've had those conversations, and we can save, a lot of heartache and having to say no to some good projects that might just need more time, or if a project really seemingly won't ever be competitive, having that discussion early so you're not investing a lot of time and resources and even putting together a concept paper. We expect, and again, we won't have everything drafted until January, but like our other programs in reformulating what those look like, we're trying to take the burden load off of partners. So the concept paper is going to be 2 to 3 pages. The final application is going to be 5 to 6 pages. We're not asking a litany of questions. We really just want you to put your best foot forward, help us dream with you, vision with you, be compelled by you and your community and the outcomes you want to see. And if I didn't mention it earlier, when we say Centennial level investment, we're thinking a GOCO investment of, anywhere between $5 and $10 million. That said, we want to work with you on what that final request amount might look like relative to other resources you have available. We do desire to be able to invest multiple locations across the state, but if there is a really overwhelming, compelling proposal at that $10 million level, we do want to be able to entertain that too. So we have the final concept paper deadline of August 3rd. We are committing to turning those around and letting applicants know that they've been selected to submit a full application by September. If we can do it earlier, we will. One change in our process here is we are going to intentionally require or request site visits for these proposals. So between September and whenever the weather gets bad, having opportunities to get out on site, again, to provide some context for what these projects might look like on the ground. So that activity would happen in that September to December window, largely, geared towards the earlier end of that spectrum. And then finally, a application deadline of December 1st. And that gives us the opportunity to get everything finalized and put together and put a recommendation in front of our programs committee for February with a March approval date. And I know that works for a lot of people, it doesn't work for some people. It's probably the best happy medium we could come up with, knowing that planning processes take time. Getting an official award in March, you might be bypassing some or all of a field season. We know that might happen. So we understand we're not going to meet everybody where they need to be, but it gives us enough time to, thoroughly vet your proposal, spend a lot of time with you helping to develop it and get you to a competitive point in the process. I said that I was going to touch on something in this intervening step between now and January. We've put together an RFI, a request for information, just to know what the universe of opportunity really looks like out there right now. So it's just a basic 5 or 6 question survey we want folks to fill out starting now, just again to get a sense for what Centennial level program projects look like for your community, and start putting those in a list. And that will help us, gauge interest, gauge, how competitive grant rounds might look like. We're asking about timelines there, estimated costs, some basic items. And we'll also use that as a launching point for conversations with regional officers. So you can begin reaching out now, but it might make the most sense to start reaching out in that January timeframe where we actually have a concept paper for you all to consider. But it doesn't hurt, if you just have some preliminary questions as to whether or not this is worth even putting on the RFI. Go ahead and do that for the regional officer in your region. And as Tila said earlier on in her introduction, all of this material will be available on our website, Centennial Program. I think we're using this fancy software now where you can actually click on those links live. I've been told, if you are one of the fortunate ones who are able to see this presentation. So all of this material will be up and available on the Centennial Program page of our website. And we really just encourage you to be reaching out to a regional officer, reach out to myself, reach out to Tila. It will be able to best direct you to the most appropriate person to have a conversation with. If I could leave you with anything, start those conversations in January, but as early as possible. So we're not waiting till the last minute. And I'm speaking to myself here when I say that. Again, we do understand we're all human and there's only so much time in a day. But if we can start those conversations earlier, we really do feel like we're going to be able to do the best job in providing feedback to you all and position you best to receive a grant award. All right, did I take up enough time, Tila? We're moving on to Q&A. If she didn't say it already, we will also, either after this Q&A session, provide a question and answers document on the website, or incorporate those into the frequently asked questions document that's been started already. And we do expect, a lot of the questions today are probably best answered after discussion with a regional officer, but would love to entertain questions now for folks that have them. And I think we've got 20 minutes left, if I'm correct. And I don't know, Tila, have you been monitoring the chat to be able to facilitate a question and answer?
I have been, CYF. I think you just did such a good job of presenting. Nobody has any questions right now. But we'll wait and see a second here.
a question? I mean, maybe it should be concerns too. Anything anybody wants to share. Again, I do think that the intent behind this is really to get you connected to the regional officers, understand that, you know, when we send a Centennial program, it is of a certain scale and magnitude. And we want to be able to understand, facilitate conversations around, you know, what do the projects like that look like for you, your region, and your partners.
Hey, Chris, this is Jarrett Roberts with Boulder County.
Hi, Jarrett.
I had a quick question. So the time frame you kind of described was visioning is 2021 through 2023, and then you were going to do implementation 24 to 26. If we have projects that are still, you know, they're in a master plan, but we haven't done a lot of the design work, and we, you know, there's still a lot of work to do to get them implementation ready. Should we still pursue this and go through the visioning, even though we may not be ready until 26 or 27 to actually implement?
I think we should talk more in depth, but like two things offhand. If you're already identifying outcomes, you might be past that visionary step already. And so we do have planning capacity money available for some of that work potentially. Really, visioning is more of that regional and partner-based community connection, things like that. And we will have vision. I should have said the visioning doesn't stop. We'll still have money available for that in 2024, 2025, and beyond. And part of what, you know, this RFI should reveal is, do we continue Centennial program past 2025? And do we start providing funding for implementation beginning in 2026, knowing that some of the visioning has already started now? So a lot of this will be informative of our next spending plan from 2025 and beyond. So hopefully that answers your question, but I do encourage you to reach out to Alex Castino. She'll be able to, you know, have a discussion with you about what projects might fit within that time window and the appropriate timeline.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wrote her name down. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, CYF, we have a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'll move on to Moira. I'll call on you, Moira. The question in the chat, what would be the grant period? Yeah, do we have funding allocated per region?
Okay, so grant period, I should have mentioned that, my apologies. We are being flexible there too. Again, in 2020, when we reimagined our programs, we took a hard look at these static grant periods and realized they don't really work well for most people. So instead of saying you need to finish in 2 years, we want you to come to us with an expected timeline. I think ideally we're talking about 4 years, maybe up to 5. But we don't want that to be a limitation to the conversation. If there's justification for pushing it to 5 years or beyond, we want to know. We do know that these do take time to put together and put on the ground. So we'd rather be realistic about what timeline should be. But if we were to ballpark something, I would say 3 to 4 years is probably the ideal. Again, there's a lot of caveats to that. And then the next question was, remind me, Tila.
Do we have funding allocated per region?
Oh, right. No, we do not have funding allocated per region. When we evaluate these projects, you know, it's a consideration we have as to, you know, if we're heavily invested in a certain region, you know, maybe we want to move money around, but it's not, there's no absolutes. So we haven't set expectations about regions, and we just don't know right at the outset here. Are we going to get everybody coming in at $10 million, or are people going to be at 5 million? And that will help, I think, for us dictate how many projects conceivably we could spread around different regions. But you know, there's no a priori assignment of funding amounts per region.
Okay, thanks, CYF. And we're going to have Moira Compton. Do you want to ask your question? Feel free to come off mute.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together for all of us. And what I wanted to ask is who would be kind of the best applicant for the Centennial program, meaning municipalities or a nonprofit? We're working on a project with municipalities, but we are kind of the guiding nonprofit on it. And so just wanted to see if you had any opinion on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we've landed on as an organization is being a little bit more flexible about who the applicant should be. If your nonprofit is the one driving the outcomes and it's a project that is truly multi-jurisdictional, then it might make the most sense for you to be the applicant. And what that would look like, though, is having support, of some kind from all the parties involved, whether they're co-applicants, again, depending on what size region we're talking about. If you have 4 or 5 different counties, there's ways that we can figure out who might be the appropriate co-applicant. Or there could be a way to organize under a singular nonprofit like yourself. So let's have a conversation about the scale of your opportunity and see if there would be what we call, quote unquote, an eligible entity that could serve as a co-applicant, and we can figure out the nuts and bolts of what that application would look like and who could be front and center.
Thank you so much.
Okay, CYF, I have a couple more from the chat. From Teresa Odello, regarding visioning for their program, when should this be starting? They're starting to do work with their community now for visioning.
I would say get in touch with your regional officer as soon as possible. And I didn't mention this, and I apologize. Our visioning also operates under the cadence of our base grant programs, similarly to land acquisition. So that money is available now, is available for 3 cycles a year. We entertain those proposals as a subset of our planning capacity program. So we have, we're now into our 3rd cycle in our nomenclature, so that would be a June award date, and I'd have to do the mental math to figure out what that means in terms of when concept papers would be due for that. But reach out now. I think you've got plenty of time to put in a concept paper for our 3rd round. I want to say it's sometime in February that those would be due.
Yeah, the first Thursday, I believe, in February is when our next concept paper opportunity is, but that is on our grant calendar on our website. Thank you, Matt, put it in the chat for you. Justin Spring wants to know if you could speak a little bit more to the efforts to combine efforts with CPW so that there might be a more streamlined application that could tap into 3 to 4 of the constitutional buckets.
Yeah, I mean, again, Justin, that really is just a conversation, I guess, with CPW and the appropriate regional manager or somebody else on leadership team to understand whether or not it elevates to a priority for the agency. I don't know, there's not much we can do beyond that because we haven't married our processes yet. And again, CPW is given the autonomy to identify, within their own agency what those Centennial priorities will look like. But as far as I know, if something like a Fisher's Peak comes up, it's not as if they're going to turn a blind eye to it. But I would think it would take that level of a project to entice CPW. And I'm not trying to speak on their behalf. So yeah, if you have something in mind, we're happy to facilitate those conversations and get folks connected to the right folks within CPW.
Thanks, CYF. Next question is, how much is allocated towards visioning versus implementation?
I think we've got, a loose a priori allocation of roughly $1 million a year for visioning. But it's not, that's not, we can exceed that or we can go less than that. But I think that's what we have allocated at this time. And that could shift too if we see a large demand for folks that want to take advantage of that visioning step. We could put more resources towards that.
Okay. Any more questions from folks that we can answer?
I see Moira's hand up still. I don't know if that's a relic or if she's got another question.
Oh, we've got, well, more. Okay, thanks, Moira. One more just came in. Stephanie Search, because of the cost and scale of most land acquisitions, are all land acquisitions considered Centennial projects, or is there remaining a separate funding category for land acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair statement for park development projects too, right? I think not every $8 million land acquisition is going to be of Centennial scale. And I think that's where the leverage comes in. So while it might be a $5 to $8 million GOCO investment, when you bring in other leverage from partner organizations, you might be talking about a $30 million acquisition at that point, or $25 million. So I would say the distinction for us really is that funding level as a very baseline, and then the discussion around the nuanced understanding of what your particular land acquisition looks like. Through our base programs, we have a soft cap, is very soft, of, we tell people 1 to 1.5 million of GOCO support. And so this is an order of magnitude more than that almost. When we talk about a $10 million investment. So I guess I would think in those terms. And it's really the outcomes that drive the Centennial program as opposed to the money in some circumstances. They're not, they're often correlated and surrogates for one another, but not always. You could happen to be working in a really expensive region where land costs are exorbitant, and that might not fit the Centennial scale. So it's hard to really answer that question fairly without knowing, the particulars of your project.
Okay, and another question. You mentioned partnering with CPW. Can you also speak about working with the U.S. Forest Service on contiguous property?
Yes, I hope I'm answering this question. We encourage cross-jurisdictional work. We do have some limitations when it comes to working with federal partners. We don't support acquisitions that ultimately end up in federal ownership, other than through some loans we've done historically. But we, in recent years, have recognized the need, especially in the stewardship space, that, ecological boundaries don't often share the same boundaries as jurisdictional boundaries. So working across Forest Service, BLM, even state properties, there is a need to think cross-jurisdictionally. So there might be an opportunity certainly there, and we want to encourage you to reach out. We do have some contacts with Forest Service, and so if we can be of assistance in leveraging those relationships, we're happy to do that. But yeah, again, when we think Centennial scale, it often will be cross-boundary to include federal partners. And I don't know if I answered that question, if that was the thread that you're trying to chase or not.
Last call for questions. Otherwise, we can take Chris off the hot seat here and wrap
Hey,
up
put
our.
somebody else back on. Okay, what do we have, about 4 minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay, and like we said, what we committed to is we'll put these question and answers into some digestible narrative form hosted on the website, and as we continue to have conversations with partners, we'll evolve that document as well as our frequently asked questions. And so hopefully with all of that and conversations you're having, we can clarify as needed into the future.